Chapter 2, Section 1. Chapter 2, Western Asia and Egypt, 3500 to 500 BC. Section 1, Civilization begins in Mesopotamia. Section 2, Egyptian civilization. Section 3, New centers of civilization. Section 4, The rise of new empires. How does progress affect history? During the 1960s, Egypt built the Aswan High Dam to control flooding of the Nile River. The lake rising behind the dam threatened to destroy ancient Egyptian monuments. An international team saved several temples, including Abu Simbel, Ramses II's temple. Abu Simbel was carved into 20-ton blocks, moved 200 feet, and reassembled. In this chapter, you will learn about Egyptian rulers and temples. Why would other countries help Egypt preserve its monuments? How can countries adapt to changing needs and still preserve their history? Section 1. Civilization begins in Mesopotamia. Civilization begins in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, located in what is now southern Iraq, was one area where civilization began. Its people developed complex economic, political, and social structures. Such inventions as written language improved the quality of their lives. As different groups fought for power, they set up the world's first empires and codified their laws. Geography and religion. Civilization depends on large permanent settlements. Fertile river valleys that can support a large population are ideal locations for such settlements. Highly organized societies then evolved in these regions. The Fertile Crescent. The ancient Greeks spoke of the valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers as Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Mesopotamia was at the eastern end of the Fertile Crescent, an arc of land from the Mediterranean Sea to the Persian Gulf. Rich soil and abundant crops allowed the land to sustain an early civilization. Mesopotamia had little rain, but over the years its soil had been enriched by layers of silt, material deposited by the two rivers. In late spring, the Tigris and Euphrates often overflowed their banks and deposited their fertile silt. This flooding, however, was unpredictable. It depended on the melting of snows in the upland mountains where the rivers began. People in the valley could not tell exactly when the floods would come or how large they would be. Therefore, people in ancient Mesopotamia learned to control the flow of the rivers. By using irrigation and drainage ditches, farmers were able to grow crops regularly. An abundance of food allowed many people to live together in cities, and civilization emerged. Mesopotamian civilization refers to the achievements of people from three general areas: Assyria, Akkad, and Sumer. The Sumerians were the creators of the first Mesopotamian civilization. The growth of religion. The physical environment affected the way Mesopotamians viewed the world. A harsh climate and frequent famines convinced them that unreliable supernatural forces controlled this world. In the presence of nature, Mesopotamians could easily feel helpless, as this poem relates. Primary source. The rampant flood which no man can oppose, which shakes the heavens and causes earth to tremble, in an appalling blanket folds mother and child, and drowns the harvest in its time of ripeness. in Mesopotamia from Before Philosophy, Henri Frankfurt et al. In Mesopotamia, people looked to religion to answer their questions about life. To them, powerful spiritual beings, gods and goddesses, permeated all aspects of the universe. The Mesopotamians identified nearly 3,000 gods and goddesses. Their religion was polytheistic because of this belief in many gods. According to the beliefs of the Mesopotamians, humans were supposed to obey and serve the gods. By their nature, humans were inferior to the gods and could never be sure what the gods might do to or for them. City-states of ancient Mesopotamia. The origins of the Sumerian people remain a mystery. By 3000 BC, they had established a number of independent cities in southern Mesopotamia, including Eridu, and Uruk. As the cities expanded, they gained political and economic control over the surrounding countryside. They formed city-states, the basic units of Sumerian civilization. Sumerian cities. Sumerian cities were surrounded by walls. Uruk, for example, was encircled by a wall 6 miles, 10 kilometers, long, with defense towers located every 30 to 35 feet, 9 to 10 meters, along the wall. It is estimated that Uruk had a population of around 50,000 people by 2700 BC, making it one of the largest city-states. City dwellings, built of sun-dried bricks, included both the small houses of peasants and the larger buildings of the city officials, priests, and priestesses. People living in city-states gained a sense of identity. They now had a group to which they belonged, beyond the basic family unit. Although Mesopotamia had little stone or wood for building purposes, it did have plenty of mud. Mud bricks, easily shaped by hand, were left to bake in the hot sun until they were hard enough to use for building. People in Mesopotamia were remarkably creative with mud bricks. They invented the arch and the dome, and they built some of the largest brick buildings in the world. Mud bricks are still used in rural areas of Southwest Asia today. Religion and rulers. The most prominent building in a Sumerian city was the temple dedicated to the chief god or goddess of the city. This temple was often built atop a massive stepped tower called a ziggurat. The Sumerians believed that gods and goddesses owned the cities. The people devoted much of their wealth to building temples and elaborate houses for the priests and priestesses who served the gods. The temples and related buildings served as the center of the city physically, economically, and even politically. Surplus food and crafts were stored in the temples, which could then be distributed or traded. The priests and priestesses who supervised the temples held a great deal of power. In fact, historians believe that in the early stages of the city-states, priests and priestesses played an important role in ruling. The Sumerians believed that the gods ruled the cities, making the state a theocracy, a government by divine authority. Even when power passed into the hands of kings, Sumerians believed that these rulers derived their power from the gods and were the agents of the gods. Regardless of their origins, kings held great power. They led armies, supervised the building of public works, and organized workers for the irrigation projects on which farming depended. The army, the government, and the priests and priestesses all aided the kings in their rule. As befitted their power, Sumerian kings, their wives, and their children lived in large palaces. Economy and society. Although the economy of the Sumerian city-states was based chiefly on farming, trade and industry became important as well. The peoples of Mesopotamia made woolen textiles and pottery, but they were particularly well known for their metalwork. Copper, gold, and silver were already being used for jewelry and some tools. The Sumerians discovered that when tin is added to copper, it makes bronze. Bronze has a lower melting point, which makes it easier to cast than copper. Bronze is also a harder metal than copper and corrodes less. It could also be melted down and remade when it wore out. The Sumerians imported copper, tin, and timber in exchange for dried fish, wool, barley, wheat, and metal goods. Traders traveled by land to the eastern Mediterranean in the west and by sea to India in the east. The invention of the wheel around 3000 BC led to wheeled carts, which made the transport of goods much easier. Sumerian city-states contained three major social groups: nobles, commoners, and slaves. Nobles included royal and priestly officials and their families. Commoners worked for palace and temple estates and as farmers, merchants, fishers, and craftspeople. Probably 90% or more of the people were farmers. Slaves belonged to palace officials, who used them mostly in building projects. Temple officials most often used female slaves to weave cloth and grind grain. Rich landowners also used slaves to farm their lands. The creativity of the Sumerians. The Sumerians created many inventions that still affect our lives today. Probably their greatest invention was their writing. In addition, historians credit them with many technological innovations. Writing and literature. Around 3000 BC, the Sumerians created a cuneiform, wedge-shaped system of writing. Using a reed stylus, a tool for writing, they made wedge-shaped impressions on clay tablets, which were then baked or dried in the sun. Once dried, these tablets lasted a very long time. Several 100,000 tablets have been found. They have been a valuable source of information for modern scholars. Mesopotamian peoples used writing primarily for record-keeping. Cuneiform texts, however, were also used in schools to train scribes, members of the learned class who served as copyists, teachers, and jurists. For boys of the upper class in Mesopotamia, becoming a scribe was the key to a successful career. Men who began their careers as scribes became the leaders of their cities, temples, and armies. Scribes came to hold the most important positions in Sumerian society. To become scribes, boys from wealthy families, many of them the sons of scribes, attended the new schools that were in operation by 2500 BC. Young boys seeking to become scribes began school when they were small children and trained until they were young men. School days began at sunrise and ended at sunset. Discipline was harsh. The following essay, written by a teacher as a copying exercise for pupils, shows that punishments, being caned or beaten with a stick, were frequent. In the tablet house, the monitor said to me, "Why are you late?" I was afraid, my heart beat fast. I entered before my teacher, took my place. My school father read my tablet to me, said, "The word is cut off," caned me. He who was in charge of drawing said, "Why, when I was not here, did you stand up?" Caned me. He who was in charge of the gate said, "Why, when I was not here, did you go out?" Caned me. My teacher said, "Your hand is not good," caned me. James B. Pritchard, Ancient Near Eastern Texts. Scribal students spent most of their school days following the same routine. They copied and recopied standard works on clay tablets and then recited from them. Although boring, this was probably the scribe's only way of learning how to form the cuneiform writing signs neatly and correctly. What did you do in school? I read my tablet, wrote it, finished it. Then my prepared lines were prepared for me, and in the afternoon, my hand copies were prepared for me. James B. Pritchard, Ancient Near Eastern Texts. Writing was important because it allowed a society to keep records and to pass along knowledge from person to person and from generation to generation. Writing also made it possible for people to communicate ideas in new ways. This is especially evident in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is an epic poem that records the exploits of a legendary king named Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is wise, strong, and perfect in body. He is part man and part god. Gilgamesh befriends a hairy beast named Enkidu. Together they set off to do great deeds. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh feels the pain of death and begins a search for the secret of immortality. His efforts fail, and Gilgamesh remains mortal. This Mesopotamian epic makes clear that everlasting life is only for the gods. Technology. The Sumerians invented several tools and devices that made daily life easier and more productive. They developed the wagon wheel, for example, to help transport people and goods from place to place. The potter's wheel to shape containers, the sundial to keep time, and the arch used in construction are other examples of Sumerian technology. The Sumerians were the first to make bronze out of copper and tin, creating finely crafted metalwork. The Sumerians also made outstanding achievements in mathematics and astronomy. In math, they devised a number system based on 60. They used geometry to measure fields and to erect buildings. In astronomy, the Sumerians charted the heavenly constellations. A quick glance at your watch and its division of an hour into 60 minutes should remind you of our debt to the Sumerians. Empires in ancient Mesopotamia. As the number of Sumerian city-states grew and the city-states expanded, new conflicts arose. City-states fought for control of land and water. Located on flat land, the Sumerian city-states were also open to invasion by other groups. Acadian and Babylonian empires. To the north of the Sumerian city-states were the Acadians. They spoke a Semitic language. Around 2340 BC, Sargon, leader of the Acadians, overran the Sumerian city-states and set up the first empire in world history. An empire is a large political unit or state, usually under a single leader, that controls many peoples or territories. Empires are often easy to create, but they can be difficult to maintain. The rise and fall of empires is an important part of history. Attacks from neighbors caused the Acadian Empire to fall by 2100 BC. After that, the system of warring city-states lasted until 1792 BC. In Babylon, a city-state south of Akkad, Hammurabi came to power. He gained control of Sumer and Akkad, thus creating a new Mesopotamian kingdom. After his death in 1750 BC, however, a series of weak kings was unable to keep the empire united, and it finally fell to new invaders. The Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi. For centuries in Mesopotamia, laws had regulated people's relationships with one another. Hammurabi's collection of laws provides great insight into social conditions there. The Code of Hammurabi was based on a system of strict justice. Penalties for criminal offenses were severe, and they varied according to the social class of the victim. A crime against a noble by a commoner was punished more severely than the same offense against a member of the lower class. Moreover, the principle of retaliation, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, was a fundamental part of this system of justice. Hammurabi's code took seriously the duties of public officials. Officials who failed to solve crimes had to make personal restitution to the victims or their families. Judges could be penalized for ruling incorrectly on a case. The law code also included what we would call consumer protection laws. Builders were held responsible for the buildings they constructed. If a house collapsed and caused the owner to die, the builder was put to death. The largest category of laws in the Code of Hammurabi focused on marriage and the family. Parents arranged marriages for their children. After marriage, the two parties signed a marriage contract, which made the marriage legal. Mesopotamian society was patriarchal, that is, men dominated the society. Hammurabi's code shows that women had far fewer rights in marriage than did men. A woman's place was definitely in the home. A husband could divorce his wife if she failed to fulfill her duties, was unable to bear children, or tried to leave home to engage in business. Even harsher, a wife who neglected her home or humiliated her husband could be drowned. Fathers ruled their children as well. Obedience was expected. If a son has struck his father, he shall cut off his hand. If a son committed a serious enough offense, his father could disinherit him. Hammurabi's laws clearly covered almost every aspect of people's lives.